There's a story about a climber who spent 3 years preparing to summit a mountain. He trained relentlessly, planned every detail, accounted for every risk on the way up. He made it to the top. And then he died on the descent. Not because the descent was harder, because he stopped being careful. He'd already won. That story isn't really about climbing. It's about what happens to your brain after you achieve something difficult. And it's the perfect metaphor for what's happening right now. In the finances of people who've done everything right. You saved when saving was hard. You invested when investing felt scary. You built a net worth that younger you would be stunned by. But the descent is where most people fall. Not when they're broke and scraping by. When they're comfortable and coasting. And the reason nobody warns you about this phase is because from the outside, it doesn't look like falling. It looks like living well. It looks like success. It looks like exactly what you were working toward. But underneath, the foundation is shifting in ways you can't see until the cracks reach the surface. Let me walk you through the financial behaviors that quietly dismantle wealth after you've built it. These aren't theoretical. These are patterns I see over and over in people who had every advantage and still lost ground. Not because they were foolish, but because wealth itself changed the way they thought about money. The first one is something I call the delegation trap. When you didn't have much money, you managed everything yourself. You knew where every dollar went. You understood your investments because you picked them. You read your own tax return. You were engaged because you had to be. Then your finances got more complex. You hired a financial advisor. You got an accountant. Maybe you brought on an estate attorney. All smart moves. But somewhere along the way, you stopped paying attention entirely. You outsourced not just the execution, but the understanding. You couldn't tell someone how your money is invested right now if they asked. You signed tax returns without reading them. You don't know what your advisor charges because you've never calculated the actual dollar amount. Just the percentage, which sounds small. This is how people get robbed slowly. Not by criminals, by misaligned incentives they're not watching. Your advisor might have you in funds that pay them higher commissions. Your accountant might be competent but not proactive, missing deductions. Because they don't know your full picture. Your estate plan might be 5 years out of date because nobody reminded you to update it after your second child was born. Delegation is necessary as wealth grows. But delegation without oversight is abdication. You don't need to do everything yourself. You need to understand everything that's being done on your behalf. Schedule one afternoon every quarter to review what your professionals are actually doing with your money. Not because they're dishonest, because nobody will ever care about your wealth as much as you do. The second behavior is one of the most expensive and least discussed. Treating your home as a wealth-building tool when it's actually a wealth-consuming tool. When your net worth crosses certain thresholds, the real estate conversations change. People stop talking about finding an affordable home and start talking about buying the best home they can qualify for. The logic sounds bulletproof. Real estate always goes up. Your mortgage interest is tax deductible. You're building equity instead of throwing money away on rent. But here's what the math actually shows. The average home in America has appreciated at roughly 3 to 4% annually over the long term. After you account for property taxes, maintenance, insurance, repairs, and transaction costs. When you buy and sell, the real return on housing often lands near zero. Meanwhile, the stock market has returned roughly 7 to 10% annually over comparable periods. Every extra dollar you put into a bigger house is a dollar. That isn't compounding in your portfolio at 2 to 3 times the rate. Someone who buys a $400,000 house instead of a $700,000 house and invests the difference doesn't just save $300,000. Over 20 years at average market returns, that gap grows to well over $1 million. But nobody at the dinner party is impressed by your brokerage account balance. They're impressed by your kitchen renovation. That social pressure is real, and it costs people hundreds of thousands of dollars over their lifetimes. Your home should be a place you enjoy living. It should not be the centerpiece of your financial strategy. The wealthiest people I've observed treat housing as an expense to manage, not an investment to maximize. The third behavior is subtle and it often looks like wisdom. Hoarding cash because it feels safe. When you've accumulated meaningful wealth, the fear of losing it intensifies. And the most intuitive response to that fear is keeping large amounts in cash. Savings accounts, money markets, maybe CDs. You can see it. You can access it. It feels safe in a way that investments in the market never do. But cash has a hidden cost that most people underestimate. Inflation. At 3% annual inflation, which is roughly the historical average, cash loses about a third of its purchasing power every 12 years. $100,000 sitting in a savings account today will buy what 70,000 buys in a decade. You're not preserving wealth. You're watching it evaporate in slow motion while feeling good about the number on your statement. The appropriate amount of cash depends on your situation. 3 to 6 months of expenses for most people. Maybe 12 months if your income is variable or you're approaching a major transition. Beyond that, every dollar in cash is a dollar being slowly destroyed by inflation. Some people keep $200,000 or $300,000 in cash because they're waiting for the right time to invest. They've been waiting for 3 years. They'll keep waiting. Meanwhile, the market they're scared of has likely grown 30 or 40% since they started hesitating. Time in the market beats timing the market. You've heard that phrase 1,000 times because it keeps being true. The security you feel from excess cash is an illusion. Real security comes from a properly diversified portfolio that grows faster than inflation. Cash feels safe. Over long periods, it's one of the worst places to store wealth. The fourth behavior is one that accelerates in your 30s and 40s, as income and social circles expand. Saying yes to every opportunity, because you can afford to. Someone invites you to invest in their restaurant. You've got the capital, so why not? A college friend is raising a seed round for a tech startup. It's only $25,000. A neighbor tells you about a real estate syndication deal with projected 15% returns. Your brother-in-law has a franchise opportunity that's a sure thing. When you had less money, these conversations never happened. Or if they did, the answer was easy. You couldn't afford it. Now you can, and that changes everything. You feel obligated because you have the means. You feel excited because these feel like rich people moves. You feel optimistic because every pitch sounds good. When the person telling you about it is enthusiastic, but private investments fail at staggering rates. Roughly 90% of startups fail. Restaurant failure rates in the first 5 years are brutal. Real estate syndications can lock up your capital for years. In deals you can't exit when things go wrong. The people pitching you these opportunities are not lying to you. They genuinely believe in what they're doing. But their belief doesn't change the base rates. Most of these investments will lose money. And unlike public market investments, you often can't sell when things go bad. You're locked in, watching your capital decline with no exit. The wealthiest people I know say no to almost everything. Not because they can't afford it, but because they understand that the cost of saying yes isn't just the money. It's the attention, the stress, the opportunity cost, and the relationship strain. When the investment doesn't work out and your friend still owes you money. Before saying yes to any opportunity, ask yourself this. If this were a public company with identical financials available on the stock market, would I invest in it? Almost always, the answer would be no. You're not investing in the opportunity. You're investing in the relationship, and that's a terrible investment thesis. The fifth behavior involves taxes, and it costs people far more than they realize. Making financial decisions without understanding the tax consequences. When your net worth was smaller, taxes were relatively simple. W-2 income, standard deduction, maybe a retirement contribution. The tax impact of your decisions was minimal because your financial life was straightforward. As wealth grows, every financial decision has a tax dimension. That can dramatically change the outcome. Selling an investment at the wrong time can cost you thousands in short-term versus long-term capital gains rates. Contributing to the wrong type of retirement account can create tax problems decades later. Ignoring tax loss harvesting means paying taxes you legally don't owe. Taking distributions from retirement accounts without planning can push you into higher brackets unnecessarily. Here's a specific example that plays out constantly. Someone has $1 million in a traditional IRA. They plan to retire in 10 years. They do nothing about it now because they won't need the money for a decade. Then they retire, start taking distributions, and realize that required minimum distributions combined with Social Security push them into a tax bracket that devours their income. If they had done strategic Roth conversions during their working years, converting portions of that traditional IRA to a Roth, while they could control the tax impact, they would have saved tens of thousands or even hundreds of thousands over their retirement. But they didn't think about it because the tax bill wasn't due yet. Tax planning is not tax avoidance. It's the legal and intelligent structuring of your financial life to minimize what you owe. Every wealthy person who stays wealthy thinks about taxes before making financial moves, not after. If you don't understand the tax implications of your financial decisions, you need to either learn or hire someone who does. But remember what I said about the delegation trap. Hire someone, then understand what they're doing and why. The sixth behavior might be the most psychologically complex. Tying your identity to your net worth so tightly that financial setbacks become existential crises. When your net worth was low, your identity wasn't wrapped up in money. You were a person who happened to not have much. Your self-worth came from other things. Your relationships, your skills, your character. As wealth grows, it starts to become part of how you see yourself. You're the person who's done well financially. You're the one in your friend group who's got it figured out. Your confidence is increasingly funded by your account balances. This creates a dangerous brittleness. When markets drop, you don't just lose money. You lose part of your identity. When a financial decision goes wrong, you don't just feel the loss. You feel shame. When someone else does better than you financially, you don't just notice. You feel diminished. This identity fusion leads to terrible decisions. You take excessive risks trying to maintain the growth your identity depends on. You hide financial problems from your spouse because admitting them feels like admitting you're not who you claim to be. You refuse to cut losses on bad investments because selling means admitting you were wrong. And being wrong threatens who you are. Your net worth is a tool. It is not you. The number in your account says nothing about your value as a person, your quality as a partner, your skill as a parent. Wealthy people who navigate decades successfully maintain a clear separation between their financial identity and their personal identity. They can lose money without losing themselves. Build that separation now, while things are going well, because markets will decline. Investments will fail. Financial setbacks will happen regardless of how smart or disciplined you are. When they do, you need to be able to respond rationally, rather than react from a place of identity threat. The seventh behavior is one that slowly poisons the wealth-building process from the inside. Neglecting your income because your portfolio feels like enough. When you were building wealth, your income was everything. It was the fuel for the entire machine. You invested in your career, developed skills, pursued raises, sought promotions. Your human capital, your ability to earn, was your most valuable asset, and you treated it that way. Then your portfolio crossed a threshold where the numbers started feeling substantial. Your investments earned $40,000 last year. Your net worth grows. Even when you do nothing, the urgency around income fades, because the portfolio seems to be doing the work now. This is a mathematical illusion. At typical withdrawal rates, a $500,000 portfolio safely generates about $20,000 annually. That's meaningful, but it's not replacing a career income. You're decades away from your portfolio carrying the full load. Meanwhile, the career investments you're not making, the skills you're not building, the promotions you're not pursuing, those compound too. Just in reverse, career stagnation doesn't just cost you this year's missed raise. It costs every future raise built on top of it. Over 20 years, the difference between growing your income at 3% annually versus 6% annually on a $100,000 base salary is over $800,000 in cumulative earnings. Most of that difference flows straight to wealth building. Your career remains your most powerful wealth building tool until your portfolio is large enough to fully replace your income. For most people, that's not until their 50s or 60s. Until then, every dollar of effort invested in earning more has a higher return than almost anything you can do with your portfolio. The eighth behavior comes from a good place but ends up being corrosive. Using money to avoid discomfort instead of building capability. When you couldn't afford solutions, you developed skills. You learned to fix things. You negotiated harder. You figured things out because you had to. Having money introduces an easy alternative. Don't like the conversation? Throw money at it. Don't want to deal with the hassle? Pay someone? Want to avoid conflict? Buy your way around it. Over time, this erodes capabilities you used to have. You lose the ability to negotiate because you always just pay asking price. You lose the ability to solve problems creatively because you always buy the solution. You lose the ability to tolerate discomfort because you always purchase comfort. These capabilities matter. Not because you should suffer unnecessarily, but because the ability to handle difficulty is itself a form of wealth. Financial setbacks happen. Economic downturns happen if your entire lifestyle depends on being able to pay your way out of every inconvenience. You become fragile in ways that money alone can't fix. Keep some friction in your life by choice. Not all of it, but enough to maintain the muscles that served you when money was scarce. Those muscles are what rebuild wealth if you ever need to. They're insurance that doesn't show up on any statement. The underlying pattern connecting all of these behaviors is the same one. From the climber story, the ascent demands everything from you. Focus, discipline, vigilance, humility. The descent feels like you can relax. You've already done the hard part. But the statistics tell a different story. More accidents happen on the way down than on the way up. More wealth is lost after it's built than during the building. Not because the threats are greater, but because the attention is less. Everything I've described here is the advanced curriculum of financial literacy. It's the part that nobody teaches because the audience for it is smaller. There are millions of people learning how to budget and start investing. There are far fewer learning how to protect and sustain wealth after building it. But this knowledge matters enormously because the cost of these mistakes scales with your net worth. A behavioral error at $50,000 might cost you $1,000. The same behavioral error at $500,000 might cost you $100,000. The stakes keep rising even as your guard keeps dropping. I created a full breakdown of financial literacy that covers this entire journey, from the fundamentals all the way through the advanced psychology of wealth preservation. If this video made you recognize patterns in your own behavior, that breakdown will give you the complete framework to correct them before they compound. Because here's what nobody said at the beginning of your financial journey: building wealth was the test you studied for. Keeping it is the test you didn't know was coming. And it's graded on a curve where most people fail quietly, comfortably, and with complete confidence that everything is fine. You know better now. What you do with that knowledge over the next decade will determine whether the wealth you built becomes the foundation for the life you want, or a peak you passed on the way back down.